Hello, welcome to a very quick and dirty video because I thought this might be quite interesting, I hope. And a lot of you who are a little bit older and have been using the C64 with the 1541 disk drive will definitely remember this. And it's this thing here, which is a weird contraption. And it's, I would say, one of the most expensive accessories that you can buy for an old floppy disk drive nowadays. Let me spoil this in the beginning for those who don't know what this is. This is a disk hole punch, which is used to punch extra holes into floppy disks. A regular floppy disk usually looks like this. This being the 5¼ inch really floppy disk, and it has a notch on one side, which is for the write protect sensor, which we will have a look in more detail in a second. And it doesn't have one on the other side, because normally you would use it only single-sidedly in the 1541, or in the back here we have a PC high-density disk drive that is actually double-sided. It has a read head on the top and a read head at the bottom. And yeah, you can write both sides of this disk. With the 1541, you can't do this. The other side will not be able to be written to due to the following reason, because this up here is no read head. This is just a felt pad like a pressure pad that puts a little bit of pressure down on this when you insert it and close the latch. This will push down slightly on the floppy disk and make it work. The notch actually lines up with this sensor here, or rather this is, I think, an infrared LED, and on the bottom there should be a photoresistor or transistor that detects if there's light or not. If it can see light, then it will be able to write. There will be a signal coming up somewhere here on these cables. It will be interpreted by the CPU on here, because this is a fully fledged computer basically. And then it will either tell the user, yes, I can write, or I can't write. And it's always the lower side of the floppy disk that is being written to, because the read head is at the bottom. And people very quickly figured out in the very early 1980s that the single-sided diskettes have coating on both sides, so you can just turn them around and use them like this. But if you do this, you will get a write error, because the notch that is on this side is not on this side. If you put some tape on here, some black tape, the disk will be write protected, just only by the signal coming here. And hence you can't write to it. But some clever people designed these little hole punches, and you would then take your floppy disk with no notch basically, and I'm using the already notched one now, and just push on it, and it would cut out this notch here. Very fancy indeed, and very cheap to do, because floppy disks back in the day were a couple of dollars or Deutschmarks or whatever per piece. I think they probably started out at like $10 a piece, so very expensive for a 10-pack. They came down in price pretty quickly, but still being able to double your capacity for the same amount of money, that's of course a great deal. Maybe let's have a closer look at the other disk drive here and how that compares. It is basically a very similar mechanism. It's more modern, so it looks a little bit different. It doesn't have the latch like that, but this other kind of latch, and it's actually even locked if you don't insert a diskette. Only if this thing here, if you get past this, you can actually turn down this thing. And then the upper read head actually locks down onto the disk as well and acts as a pressure pad for the lower head. And that's how this works. So this thing can obviously use the floppy disk from both sides, but it won't be able to read the disk if you flip it over. There's another difference because there's one more hole in here, and if we twist this, there will be I hope you can see that, there will be a little hole in the medium. And there's another sensor. There would be one here. You can't see that right now. Let me push this back again a little bit. So here would be another sensor on the floppy disk. So when I insert this, the hole aligns perfectly with the sensor. But of course, Commodore saved on this as well, so it isn't fitted and isn't used. But on the PC floppy drive, it is used. There is the sensor here and the LED, and it's the index pulse, so that the drive knows and the computer knows exactly when the first sector of a track passes under the read head. The 1541 doesn't know that. It just has to read continuously and decode using its CPU and see which sector happens to fly past the disk. Which is also why the flippy disk works on here, because otherwise you would have an issue with the index pulse. So yeah, that's actually pretty neat. So why are these things so widely different? The reason was mainly because floppy disk drives used to be very expensive in the beginning. So Commodore had its own chip manufacturer, MOS. They belonged to them, so they could produce all these chips basically for free. It wasn't very expensive for them to produce these. So building their own PCB, control PCB for the whole floppy drive was actually rather cheap for them. So they bought these mechanisms without extra sensors, without the track 0 sensor. So that's why we get the head banging without the index pulse sensor. Just very minimal. They are even missing this control board over here. And this is actually quite an interesting one. If we look at this, there's this single IC and this servo controller IC integrate all the technology that's basically in here. So this whole board over here is this board here. This is of course more advanced because it's a couple of years later, but also because the chips here from Panasonic are highly specialized and built only for reading and writing floppy disks. If we take a look at the service manual for the disk drive, we can see that the main IC here, which is this one, controls everything, takes the input from the read-write heads up here, amplifies them, rectifies them to become, or digitizes them basically to become a digital signal, which is still not decoded. It's basically the raw flux information in digital form and amplified form. And it also has control lines for the servo motor, which will control the stepper, etc. So this is all put into one single chip instead of this big PCB that Commodore had to build. So that's basically why PC disk drives were in one way more expensive, but for the manufacturer, well, Panasonic had probably the whole assembly line for everything that they built here. I think most of the capacitors and ICs were probably done by them in-house as well. But Commodore didn't have the expertise to build the mechanisms, so they bought the mechanisms and did what they could do best, design computers, and that's what they built here. They also had to put in an extra power supply because the C64's power supply was not beefy enough, so that's why there's a power supply in here as well, which of course isn't needed on the PC because the PC had to provide the power to the internal floppy disk drive. So yeah, doing the storage doubling technique on those old floppy disks was definitely kind of a rite of passage, I would say, for school kids back in the day, and many other people, I guess, because floppy disks were rather expensive. And yeah, you can still get these. If you look at eBay, people will sell used ones. Sometimes you get them for around 20 euros, 26 euros, and someone will even asked 60 euros for that. So that's a bit crazy. All right, but that's it for today. Very quick, short video about one obscure item. Thanks for watching. Put a comment in down below into the comment area if you ever used one of the disk punches, or what other tricks did you use to get more stuff onto your floppy drive. And yeah, other than that, see you in the next one. Bye.